Hi, I am Brenna. I'm with the Menomonie Police Department.
Hi, I'm Angie. I'm the Director of Sexual Assault Victim Services at the Bridge to Hope.
And I'm Kat. I am the Sexual Assault Victim Advocate and UW Stout Campus Advocate at the Bridge to Hope.
And I'm Kelly. I am a patrol lieutenant with the Menomonie Police Department.
And we are once again coming together to bring you a Bridging the Gap video, this time in honor of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So you may or may not be aware, but October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And what that is, it evolved from the Day of Unity, which originated in October of 1981. That came from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. The goal of that day initially was to connect advocates who were working together to end domestic violence against women and their children. And that day grew into becoming an entire week. And it really grew from like a kind of a grassroots efforts to encompass activities at the local and the state and now the national levels. So later on in the 80s, 1987, the first Domestic Violence Awareness Month was observed. And that same year saw the initiation of the first National Domestic Violence Toll-Free Hotline, which is a great tool. We'll have that in the resources at the end of this video. And then in 1989, the U.S. Congress passed the first public law that designated October as National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, as we know it now. And every year, the Day of Unity is now celebrated on that first Monday of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So I talked about kind of activities associated with these, the Day of Unity that then was expanded into a week and then a month. These activities all had common themes. So really looking at mourning those who have died because of domestic violence, celebrating those who have survived, and then connecting those who work to end the domestic violence together. The Silent Witness Project is also often observed during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And what that is that is made up of painted life-size figures. They're red within that project, and with shields that tell the story of individual women and others who have died as a result of domestic violence within the previous year. The display is said to be viewed in at least 48 or 46 states annually, and you can find a similar display here in Menomonie. Right now you can see the Bridge to Hope's display outside of the Dunn County Judicial Center. And in this case, instead of being red, their figures are painted black, and they have real life stories of lives that have been lost in the last year due to domestic violence homicide. In order to really discuss domestic violence and Domestic Violence Awareness Month, it's important that everybody have the correct understanding of what domestic violence is, and that everyone is speaking the same language, so to speak. So Angie and Kat will walk us through some definitions and signs, examples, things to look for.
Thanks, Brenna. So domestic abuse, or intimate partner violence, also known as IPV, is a pattern of abusive behavior that's used by one partner to gain or maintain control over another partner. It can include verbal, economic, sexual, or physical abuse. And later on in this presentation, we'll add a graphic of our power and control wheel, which explains this really, really well. So to understand relationship abuse, we first have to recognize that it's more than physical violence. Ending the harm and stigma of domestic violence requires a nuanced understanding of the behaviors that define it, as well as examples of what healthy relationships are to inform your decisions and interactions moving forward. Domestic violence does not discriminate. People of any race, age, gender, sexuality, religion, education level, or economic status can be victims of intimate partner violence or domestic violence, or the perpetrator of domestic violence. That includes behaviors that physically harm, intimidate, manipulate, or control a partner, or otherwise force them to behave in ways they don't want to, including through physical violence, threats, emotional abuse, or financial control. Every relationship is different, and domestic violence doesn't always look the same. One feature shared by most abusive relationships is that the abusive partner tries to establish or gain power and control through many different methods at many different moments.
As Angie mentioned, there are several different types of abuse, and I think it's important for us to understand that some of them may overlap, but many of them look different. And also, kind of like Brenna said, we need to be able to understand all different types of abuse to understand why we're here and why we're talking about this in the first place. The first type that I'll bring up is probably one that comes to mind for most folks first, which is physical abuse. Somebody might be experiencing physical abuse if their partner has or repeatedly does any of the following behaviors, which would be pulling your hair, punching, slapping, kicking, biting, choking, or smothering you. If they forbid somebody or prevent them from eating or sleeping, using weapons or threats of violence against you, including use of firearms, knives, bats, mace, any kind of weapon, preventing you from contacting emergency services, from dialing 911. That might include medical attention or law enforcement. They may make threats or physically harm children or pets, driving recklessly or dangerously with you in the car or abandoning you in unfamiliar places, forcing you to use drugs or alcohol, especially if you have a history of substance abuse, trapping you in your home or preventing you from leaving, throwing objects at you or destroying property, or even preventing you from taking prescribed medication, or on the other side of that, also denying you necessary medical treatments.
Another type of abuse that we see most often in victims at the Bridge to Hope is emotional or verbal abuse. You might be in an emotionally or verbally abusive relationship if your partner attempts to exert control by maybe calling you names, insulting you, or constantly criticizing you, even if they say that they're just joking. Acting jealous or possessive, or refusing to trust you, like always saying that you're cheating on them with the person next door. Isolating you from your family, your friends, other people in your life, your support systems. Monitoring your activities with or without your knowledge, including demanding to know where you go, who you're with, how you spend your time, keeping track of you 24/7. Attempting to control what you wear, including your clothes, makeup, hairstyles. They might try to humiliate you in any way, especially in front of other folks. Gaslighting you by pretending not to understand or refusing to listen to you, questioning your recollection of the facts, the events, or sources, trivializing your needs or your feelings, or denying previous statements of or promises. They might threaten you, your children, your family, or your pets with or without weapons. They might start to damage your belongings, including throwing objects, punching the walls, kicking the doors, etc. Blaming you for their abusive behaviors. And oftentimes, like I said earlier, accusing you of cheating or cheating themselves and then blaming you for their own actions. They might also cheat on you intentionally to hurt you and threaten to cheat again just to suggest that they're better than you. And then also telling you that you're lucky to be with them and that they'll never find anybody better.
Sexual abuse can also be a form of domestic violence. And somebody who's experiencing sexual abuse or sexual violence may experience some of the following. Forcing you to dress in a sexual manner that you're not comfortable with, insulting you in sexual ways or calling you explicit names, forcing or manipulating you into having sex or performing sexual acts, especially when you are maybe sick or tired or physically injured from their abuse, choking or restraining you during sex without your consent, holding you down during sex without your consent, hurting you with weapons or objects during sex, possibly involving other people in your sexual activities against your will and without your consent, ignoring your feelings regarding sex, forcing you to watch and or make pornography, or even intentionally giving you or attempting to give you a sexually transmitted infection.
One thing that we don't talk about often enough is sexual coercion. Sexual coercion lies on the continuum of sexually aggressive behavior, and it might vary in practice from begging and persuasion to forced sexual contact. It might be verbal and emotional through statements made to pressure, guilt, or shame, or it might appear even more subtly. Even if your partner isn't forcing you to perform sexual acts against your will, making you feel obligated to do them is coercion in itself. Being in a relationship, no matter what the arrangement, never means that you owe your partner intimacy of any kind. Examples of this kind of behavior could be implying that you owe them something sexually in exchange for previous actions, gifts, or consent, like, oh, well, I took you to dinner and a movie tonight, so you owe me. Giving you drugs or alcohol to loosen up your inhibitions, or using your relationship status as leverage, including by demanding sex as a way to prove your love, or threatening to cheat or leave, finding somebody who will have sex with them. Reacting with sadness, anger, or resentment if you don't say no, or if you do say no or don't immediately agree to something, or try to normalize their sexual demands by saying that they need it. It also means continuing to pressure you after you say no, or intimidate you into fearing what will happen if you do say no.
Another type of coercion that is, again, often overlooked is reproductive coercion. And this is a form of power and control where one partner strips another of the ability to control their own reproductive system. It can be difficult to identify this form of coercion, especially since it is often less visible than other types of abuse that are often occurring at the same time. And it might just appear as pressure, guilt, or shame about having or wanting children, or not having or wanting them. Some examples of this can include refusing to use a condom or other types of birth control, breaking or removing a condom before sex, or refusing to pull out, lying about methods of birth control, such as having a vasectomy or being on a hormonal birth control, such as the pill, etc. Removing birth control methods like birth control rings, IUDs, contraceptive patches, or sabotaging methods by poking holes in condoms, tampering with medications, things like that. This could also include withholding money to purchase birth control or emergency contraception, monitoring your menstrual cycles to inform their abuse, forcing pregnancy or not supporting your decision when it comes to deciding whether or not you want to have children, intentionally becoming pregnant against your wishes, forcing you to get an abortion or preventing you from getting one, threatening you or acting violent if you don't agree to continue or to end a pregnancy, and keeping you pregnant by getting you pregnant again shortly after you have a child.
Another type of abuse that's very common is financial abuse. Financial or economic abuse occurs when an abusive partner extends their power and control into your financial situation. This can take a lot of different forms that include providing you with an allowance and closely monitoring how you spend it, including demanding receipts for your purchases, depositing your paycheck into an account that you can't access, or not giving you the information to your bank accounts or what your financial status is, preventing you from viewing or accessing those accounts. If somebody prevents you from working, limiting the hours that you work, or getting you fired, or forcing you to work certain types of jobs, maxing out your credit cards without permission, or not paying credit card bills, or otherwise harming your credit score. Stealing money from you, your family, or your friends is financial abuse. Withdrawing money from your children's savings account without your permission. Living in your home but refusing to work or contribute to the household. Forcing you to provide them with your tax returns, or confiscating joint tax returns. Or refusing to provide money for necessary or shared expenses like food, clothing, transportation, medical care, or medicine.
Digital abuse is a form of abuse that's becoming more and more prevalent as we see technology progress. And this is a type of abuse where technology and the internet are used to bully, harass, stalk, intimidate, or control a partner. This behavior is often a form of verbal or emotional abuse, and it's conducted primarily online. Some examples of digitally abusive behavior would include telling you who you can or can't follow or interact with or be friends with on social media, sending you negative, insulting, or threatening messages or emails, using social media to track your activities, insulting or humiliating you in posts online, including posting unflattering photos or videos of you, sending, requesting, or pressuring you to send unwanted explicit photos or videos, or sex or other compromising messages, stealing or insisting on being given your account passwords and information, constantly texting you or making you feel like you can't be separated from your phone or other devices for fear that you'll anger them, looking through your phone or checking up on your pictures, texts, phone records, etc. Using any kind of technology, for example, a type of spyware, perhaps GPS either in your car, your phone, whatever, to monitor your whereabouts and activities. using smart home technology, smart speakers, security cameras, and so on to track your movements, your communications, your activities, and even possibly creating fake social media profiles in your name or image, using your phone or email to send messages to others pretending to be you as a way to embarrass you or isolate you, or perhaps creating fake profiles to harass you online under the disguise of being another person. And then another piece of digital abuse is that it comes with its own unique concerns and stipulations to consider. As I said, technology continues to evolve. So we continue learning new things and trying to understand this as it changes over time. But a few things that we should remember when it comes to digital abuse in particular is that you never have to share your passwords with anyone if you don't want to. You never have to send any explicit pictures, videos, messages that you're uncomfortable sending. Sexting can have legal consequences. So nude photos or videos of somebody under the age of 18 in particular could be considered child pornography, which is entirely illegal to own or distribute. You should be able to remind yourself that it's okay to turn off your phone and not have to respond to messages right away. You can turn things off. You can have your own time. You have the right to your own privacy. Make sure that the people who might need to reach you in an emergency still have access to you, but you don't owe people your time every minute of the day. If you're experiencing any kind of harassment, try to save or document those threatening messages, photos, videos, or voicemails as evidence of the abuse. Don't answer calls from unknown or blocked numbers. Your abuser might try calling you from another line if they suspect that you're avoiding them, if they haven't heard from you in a while, just to try and confirm that you've been avoiding them. Find out if your phone company allows you to block numbers and how many numbers you can block, if that's possible. And if you need help doing so, they might be able to walk you through those steps. Once you share a post or message, it's no longer under your control, and it's good to remember that as well, just to be conscious of that, because abusive partners may save or forward anything that you are sharing online, so be careful sending content that you wouldn't want others to see. Know and understand privacy settings, and this is another one that's, again, always changing, so it's good to try and check in on those settings on different social media platforms, on your cellular devices, and so on. Just every so often, make sure that you're checking in and making sure you know what your settings are set to, because these settings are often very customizable, and you'll usually find them in the privacy section of different websites. But just keep in mind that some apps might require you to change those settings individually in order to use them. Be mindful when you're checking in places online. I know, for example, Facebook has the option to check in to certain locations. And by doing so, you're sharing where you're at, you're sharing your location in a post, or perhaps you're posting a photo online and it's in an area that has a distinguishable background, where somebody might be able to easily identify where you're at any moment. Maybe ask your friends to ask you permission before they're posting content that could compromise your privacy if your friends are posting photos of you that you're not comfortable with, and doing the same for others as well, making sure that they're comfortable with what you're posting about them online. And lastly, avoiding contact with your abuser in any capacity through any technology, whether that be online or in person. Some people may have to consider changing phone numbers, changing passwords, and so on, if the abuse and harassment does not stop.
The last type of abuse we're going to talk about today is stalking. Stalking occurs when someone watches, follows, or harasses you repeatedly, making you afraid or unsafe, and may occur when someone you know, a past partner, or a stranger. There are some common different examples of stalking that include somebody showing up at your home or workplace unannounced or uninvited, somebody sending you unwanted text messages, letters, emails, or voicemails, especially after you already told them to stop, leaving you unwanted items, gifts, or flowers, calling you and hanging up repeatedly, or making unwanted phone calls to you, your employer, a professor, or a loved one, using social media or using technology or social media to track your activities. A stalker might manipulate other people to investigate your life, including using someone else's social media account to look at your profile or befriending your friends in order to get information about you. They might wait at places you spend a lot of time at. They might try to damage your home, car, or other property. They might also hire a private investigator to follow you or find you as a way of knowing your location or movements.
So what are law enforcement efforts and responses to domestic violence? Well, the first thing that happens is an officer might get called to a situation where some form of domestic violence is happening. It is our job to respond and to investigate and see what's happening. It may be someone within the household calling, or it may be someone who is a passerby or family or friend that got a disturbing text or message or is just concerned. When we go to a domestic violence household, we're going to want to talk to both people involved, anybody else that might be there that have witnessed what's happening. We do understand that as a victim, it might be very difficult to talk to law enforcement, and you may not want to talk to law enforcement if your abuser is still there out of concern for what could happen if you do talk with us. We will separate the abuser and the victim out, discuss with both parties what happened, and we want all the information. We want you to share if there was something physical that happened and as a victim you had to defend yourself, or you did something that was also physical back for whatever reason it was. We want you to share that with us. We are trained to talk to people and gather information and try to find out what really happened. And a lot of times officers are able to determine based on how honest a person is, what's really going on. We also, if you do not talk and you refuse to tell us what's happening, it doesn't mean that officers can't observe other things in the household to kind of make a judgment upon what's going on. If a reporter is anonymous and they reported hearing things breaking and yelling and screaming, we come to your household and we find out that you've got holes in your wall from somebody punching them, and we can see that there's dishes broken on the floor. We are going to make an evaluation based on that. Our goal is not to make life more difficult for a victim, but our goal is to provide a victim with resources and the opportunity that when and if they're ready to leave the situation they're in and they are to that place, we will link them up with whatever resources we're able to. One of the first resources is the Bridge to Hope that we're going to provide them with help from them and have an advocate come and support them. Not that officers don't feel the need to support them. It's just we also have the other end of that where we're investigating if a crime is committed and what those crimes are, and making sure we document that properly. So there is the potential for a conviction at some point in court if that's where the situation goes to. Officers are going to talk to you, take information. If we determine that a crime has been committed and it fits the criteria that it would be a domestic violence crime, whether you are or not in a domestic relationship, we're going to go over a form with you. It's called the Lethality Assessment Program, and it's a form, it's evidence-based to reduce intimate partner violence, homicides, by being a form of intervention which allows the victims an opportunity to see themselves, their abusers, and their overall situation through a different lens. Basically, some of those questions we're asking is going to force the victim to think about some of the severity of what's going on in their lives. And while that can be stressful to them, we want them to understand and know that their situation is dangerous potentially, and we don't want them to be in a situation where that danger keeps increasing. The lapse an opportunity for us to educate victims about what behaviors to look out for. So even if the victim does not wish for our help, is not at that phase in their journey yet, it can help demonstrate that there's an escalation of violence in their relationship, and these are the certain behaviors to look for. It also helps to explain the cycle of violence, and that now there can be good days mixed with very bad days in an abusive relationship. It enhances cooperation, communication, and coordination between the law enforcement agencies, domestic violence programs, and other systems. This is meant to work hand in hand with an advocacy program and with the court system to give a determination of the likeliness that a victim is going to be severely injured or potentially killed. And we want to share that with other groups who may have and be willing to offer services to our victims. So overall, the LAP is really about victim safety. The LAP is doing what we can to help a victim of abuse leave that situation and be given options and a safety plan. At the very, very minimum, if a victim does not wish to leave, we will help safety plan with them. The advocate that we speak to will help safety plan with them. We're looking for ways to make sure that they feel safe, and that even if the time that we're there the first time isn't when they're ready to leave, to know that they can continue to call us, and we will continue to offer these services and help them in any way we can. So the way the LAP works is an officer will go through the sheet with them and read off different questions to them. Depending on what the victim answers, an officer is going to circle yes or no or not answered. If an officer deems that a subject is at a high risk for death or great bodily harm, we're going to call a hotline. Mandatorily, we will call a hotline from the scene, regardless if the victim wants to speak with an advocate or not at that time. And that's for our end of things, that we will speak to an advocate initially. We will let the victim know that they're in a great risk of danger, and that we are willing to provide and help them seek out domestic violence services from the Bridge to Hope. And we will ask them again once we're on the phone if they wish to talk to an advocate. If they don't want to talk to an advocate, we're not going to force it. We're not going to make them do that. But if they do, the person's on the phone and they can hook up with an advocate and speak with them immediately. And at the very least, maybe arrange an appointment that they wouldn't have arranged otherwise. The LAP is on a scoring system. Points are based on the individual's situation. An example of a question is, have they ever used a weapon against you or threatened to use a weapon against you? Have they threatened to kill you or your children? Do they have a gun, or can they easily access one? These questions are meant to elicit either a yes or no response. We aren't asking for details necessarily at that time. However, if a victim wishes to share, we will discuss that after this. The LAP is only done with intimate partner relationships. It is not done with roommates that are just friends. There has to be a sense of intimacy there. Part of the LAP is to provide empowerment to the victims. It gives the victims a choice to participate in any and all of the processes. We give them options and we give them services, and we help them get connected with those services if they need to be. And it is really up to a victim if they choose to participate in any of that, because we will not force them to do anything that they don't feel comfortable doing at that time. So despite there being a scoring system with the LAP, an officer can also screen a victim in based on a feeling that they feel that this victim is in danger and is just not willing to share at this time. An officer can go on gut feelings and say that they feel that the victim is maybe not being completely honest about what their situation is, and screen them in and offer them services either way. For some statistics related to domestic violence, 80 people in Wisconsin lost their lives to domestic violence in 2021 statistic, 12 more deaths than the previous year, which is the highest amount since 2000. In 2021, domestic violence homicides took place in 21 Wisconsin counties, with a rate of 1 death every 4.5 days. Of those who died, 65 were homicide victims, up to 58 in 2020. And 11 were perpetrators of homicide who died by suicide, up to 8 in 2020. Over half, 52% of victims, were the perpetrator's current or former intimate partner. So far in 2022, there's been a total of 87 LAPs and 50 being high danger. The LAP is now widely used across our state. However, it should be noted the Menomonie Police Department and the Dunn County Sheriff's Office are the second group to start using the LAP in the state. So To kind of link in with the lab, we also have a DVRT program, which is the Domestic Violence Response Team. The Domestic Violence Response Team provide a resource to people so that the police and the Bridge to Hope advocates work together hand in hand to guide the victim through the process of domestic violence. We developed this program, and it's only used at the Menomonie Police Department in this county at this time. However, it's been a very useful program to get victims the resources they need them at that time and to walk them through the court system. So the way the domestic violence response team works is that we go through the lab at first. And if the person screens us in as high risk at this time, that person qualifies for the domestic violence response team. They are screened in, and then they are assigned an advocate and an officer, with the goal that the advocate and the officer will arrange to make a meeting time later on with that victim to do follow-up with them. This has been very useful for us to help a victim feel safe and to feel supported. This has also allowed for officers to get a more in-depth interview and more in-depth information about what had happened the evening of the domestic violence incident, or to gather a history of domestic violence regarding that relationship, as people sometimes have more of a time to think and they remember more information, because usually when we're at a domestic violence scene, the person is in a very traumatic situation and they may not remember everything that happened right away, and they may not be at a state where they can explain everything that they should be sharing at that time. You are a part of the domestic violence response team until you choose to be out of it, which could mean through the court system, which could mean through just through the beginning phases where the advocate helps, or it could mean a shorter time period where you just have a couple of questions, but you will stay an active member until we deem that you are ready to be out of the program. It is an option to be in the program and to only work with an advocate if you so wish, and you do not wish to work with the police. And it's also an option to work with the police and not work with an advocate. However, the purpose of the program is to bring the two groups together as a unified source to try and gather as much information as we can to provide services to victims.
So at the Menomonie Police Department, we've been using the LAP since 2016. And if I'm not mistaken, since using the LAP, referrals and people utilizing the resources at the Bridge to Hope have increased.
I would say that that's correct. We've been reaching victims in communities that we wouldn't have reached before, that had no idea of what our services even looked like. Now that we're doing the LAP, when we are talking with victims on the phone, they're way more apt to come in for an appointment, whether it be for a restraining order, help with divorce, or maybe coming in for emergency shelter. And previously they had no idea that maybe they even could come in for those services, or sometimes they think, oh, well, the Bridge to Hope is just an emergency shelter and I don't want to leave my home. Well, there are a lot of other services that we can provide for them without them having to leave their home. Shelter is often the last place that people want to ever come, and we totally understand that. But they can still utilize our pantry. They can utilize one-on-one advocacy, our support groups, and we have tons and tons of different services that they can utilize beyond just our emergency shelter. And so when officers are meeting with victims, they often highlight those other services because victims often get scared away when they hear emergency shelter. It's also good to note that we do accept pets into our shelter. So if somebody is debating whether or not they want to leave the relationship, oftentimes one of those barriers is they don't want to leave their pets. Well, our shelter is pet friendly. We have removed all the carpeting, so we have hardwood floors for the pets, and we've pretty much had just about any kind of pet imaginable in our shelter. But it's really been important for our victims to be able to have a safe space for their animals. Recently, we just did a pet walk, and we did that with the Dunn County Humane Society because they provide a lot of services for the animals in our shelter, whether it be, for their shots or getting vaccinated, spayed, neutered, food. They have a specific grant in order to help us with those things, which has been an amazing partnership.
Awesome.
I'd like to also note that their services are confidential. So if you choose to work with the Bridge to Hope and you don't want the police department or anyone else for that matter to know you are working with them, they don't share your information. They don't share that you've ever reached out to them. They don't share anything about you or what you're going through unless you ask them to or give them permission to.
That's a really good point, Kelly. And I want to point out that even when we're doing our laps, we only ask for the victim and offender's initials unless the victim explicitly gives permission to share their name. We really value confidentiality, so we're not going to release any information without a release to anybody without that permission.
Thank you so much for joining us for the video. And as always, we'll have resources and information following the video and then in the text box along with it. Thanks.